My father left me at a mall parking lot as a joke. Let's see how long she lasts without us. But I never looked back again. The day my family erased me from their lives was supposed to be ordinary. I'd just turned 18 the week before and was preparing to start college in the fall, the first in our family to do so. Mom had left for her weekend hospital shift, always working extra hours to help with my upcoming tuition, and Dad was in charge of driving me and my 20-year-old brother Ethan to the mall. I needed to pick up some dorm supplies, and Ethan was meeting friends later. "Hurry up, Lily," Dad called impatiently from downstairs. "We don't have all day." I rushed down, phone in hand, wearing the new blouse Mom had bought for my birthday. Dad had been tense lately. Arguments with Mom about my college expenses had become frequent, and Ethan's decision to skip university for his third attempt at launching a music career wasn't helping family harmony. The mall was crowded with weekend shoppers. I split off to check the bookstore for textbooks while they went to the electronics store. Dad always indulged Ethan's endless requests for music equipment. We agreed to meet at the food court in an hour. When I arrived at our designated meeting spot, they weren't there. I texted Dad, but got no response. After 30 minutes of waiting, I called, straight to voicemail. Same with Ethan. Annoyed but not yet worried, I walked to the parking lot, expecting to find them waiting in the car. The spot where we'd parked was empty. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I called again, then again. Nothing. I sent messages that showed as delivered but remained unread. I even checked my location app. Dad's phone appeared to be moving north on the highway, already miles away. They had left without me. I sat on a bench near the entrance, telling myself there must be a misunderstanding. Dad was forgetful, but not cruel. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe Ethan had fallen ill, and they rushed to a hospital. 1 hour passed. Then 2. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. My phone battery dwindled to 15%, then 5%, before dying completely. No one had called or texted back. A security guard approached as the mall prepared to close. "Everything okay, miss?" My ride never showed, I said, embarrassment mixing with growing unease. "My phone's dead." He let me use the security office phone. I called our home number, disconnected. I tried Mom's cell. A recorded message said the number was no longer in service. Every familiar number I tried was either disconnected or went unanswered. "Would you like us to call the police?" the guard asked, concern evident in his expression. "I don't know," I replied, confusion turning to fear. My family wouldn't just leave me, but they had. When I finally agreed to let the guard call the police, things got worse. Officers arrived and took my statement, then made a welfare check at our house. They returned with disturbing news. The house appeared emptied. Neighbors reported a moving truck the previous day, and mail had piled up for over a week. "This wasn't spontaneous," an officer explained gently. "It appears your family relocated without informing you." Shock rendered me speechless. The police searched missing persons databases, contacted hospitals, and checked border crossings. The next morning they confirmed what I couldn't comprehend. My father's car had crossed into Canada the previous evening, passenger manifests showing both him and Ethan. There was no record of my mother, but her last paycheck had been collected 2 weeks prior. They had planned this, all of them. With no money, no ID except my driver's license, and nowhere to go, I spent that night in a women's shelter. The social worker, Ms. Reyes, helped me file reports and connect with emergency services. "Sometimes families fracture under pressure," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Financial stress, college expenses. Are you saying they abandoned me because of tuition costs?" I asked incredulously. She didn't answer directly, but her silence was confirmation enough. 3 days later, while using the shelter's computer, I discovered our family bank account had been emptied 2 weeks earlier. My college fund, money Mom had been saving for years, was gone. So was the deposit for my dorm room. The police investigation revealed more calculated betrayal. My acceptance letter had been hidden from me for weeks while they prepared their escape. The leasing office confirmed our house had been vacated with proper notice, all signed by my father weeks ago. Mom's resignation letter at the hospital was dated a month back. The most damning evidence came from a mall security camera near where we'd parked. As they drove away, my father's voice was captured on the footage. "Let's see how long she lasts without us." Ethan's laughter followed as they accelerated out of view. I watched that footage a dozen times, each viewing hardening something inside me. They hadn't abandoned me in a moment of madness. They'd planned it meticulously, laughing as they discarded me from their lives. Abandoned at 18, with no money, no home, and college dreams evaporated, I spent the next months in survival mode. Shelters became temporary homes while I took any job I could find. Waitressing, retail, cleaning offices, whatever paid cash until I could establish myself again. Without transcripts or financial support, college was deferred indefinitely. I crashed on couches of new acquaintances, worked double shifts, and slowly rebuilt the documentation of my existence: birth certificate, social security card, bank account. The question that haunted my sleepless nights was simple. Why? What had I done to deserve such calculated cruelty? Was my dream of education so offensive? Was I such a burden that erasing me seemed the only option? As weeks turned to months, I stopped asking why. The answer didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I would do next, how I would rise from this betrayal and build something they couldn't take away. I made a promise to myself as I fell asleep on a shelter cot 6 months after being abandoned. I would not only survive this, I would thrive. And someday, when they least expected it, they would realize what they had thrown away. 3 years passed in a blur of minimum wage jobs and community college night classes. I'd managed to secure a tiny studio apartment, establish credit in my own name, and complete an associate's degree in business administration. Life wasn't comfortable, but it was mine, built from nothing, owned by no one else. Every spare dollar went toward education. Every spare hour toward studying or working. Friends were luxuries I couldn't afford, relationships, distractions I didn't need. My singular focus was building a foundation they couldn't destroy. I never searched for my family. Pride and pain kept me from looking backward. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. It happened during a rare evening of relaxation, scrolling through job postings on social media. A "people you may know" suggestion appeared: Ethan Mercer. My finger froze above the screen, coffee forgotten in my other hand. It was undeniably him. Older, sporting an expensive haircut and designer clothes, posing in front of a sleek recording studio. His profile was public, a showcase of the life I'd been excluded from. My heart raced as I fell down the rabbit hole of his digital existence. There were photos of Ethan at music festivals, behind mixing boards at industry parties. He'd apparently found success as a producer at a boutique label in Vancouver. And in many pictures, beaming proudly beside him, stood our father. They hadn't disappeared. They had reinvented themselves just across the Canadian border. Close enough to have returned for me at any time, had they wanted to. I created an anonymous account and methodically documented their new lives. My father had established a talent management agency, with Ethan as a star client and eventual partner. They lived in a waterfront condo, vacationed in Europe, drove luxury cars. My mother was notably absent from recent photos, though mentioned occasionally in memorial posts. She had succumbed to cancer 2 years after they left me behind. Had she known about their plan to abandon me? Had she agreed to it? The possibility that my mother had died while I worked double shifts in diners, unaware and unable to say goodbye, unleashed a grief so profound I called in sick to work for the first time ever. The deeper I dug, the more the narrative of my absence emerged. A local entertainment blog interviewing Ethan quoted him describing his difficult family history. "We lost my mom to cancer and my sister to the streets. She fell into drugs, ran away. Dad and I tried everything to find her, but sometimes you have to accept that people choose their own paths." The lie struck me like a physical blow. I hadn't run away, they had abandoned me. I hadn't chosen drugs. I'd chosen survival, education, and perseverance. Yet here they were, painting themselves as the victims of my fictional self-destruction. Their success was built on the money that should have funded my education. My college savings had financed Ethan's recording equipment. My mother's life insurance had probably capitalized their agency. They had sacrificed me for Ethan's golden future and then created a convenient narrative to absolve their guilt. That night, I made a decision. Grieving wouldn't change the past, but ambition could reshape my future. If they had used my stolen opportunities to build their empire, I would build something greater from nothing but my own determination. I transferred to a 4-year university with my hard-earned credits, focusing on business and technology, fields with clear paths to financial independence. I applied for every scholarship, worked through every semester, and networked relentlessly. Where others had family connections, I had hunger and resilience forged by necessity. By 25, I had completed my MBA, landing a position at a financial technology startup that valued innovation over pedigree. I changed my last name legally to my mother's maiden name, Ross, partly to shield myself from ever being found, partly to honor the parent I chose to remember with compassion rather than suspicion. While Ethan enjoyed the spotlight as the golden child of their boutique music empire, I worked silently behind the scenes of a company that would eventually revolutionize how people accessed financial services. I lived modestly, investing rather than spending, building wealth that couldn't be taken on someone's whim. I kept tabs on them through industry publications and social media, watching their story unfold like a parallel universe, the life I might have shared had I been deemed worthy of keeping. Ethan's production credits grew, my father's agency expanded, and I rose through the ranks of my company, unnoticed by anyone who had once known me. "Do you ever think about reconnecting with family?" my colleague Marcus asked during a rare personal conversation after I declined yet another holiday invitation. "I don't have family," I replied, the practiced response automatic after years of use. "Everyone has family," he insisted. I looked at him, allowing a rare glimpse of truth to surface. Not everyone gets to keep them. I taped a printout of Ethan's smiling face inside my planner, not from sentimentality, but as motivation. Every morning I looked at the brother who had laughed as our father drove away, leaving me behind. Every night I reviewed my financial goals, my career trajectory, my strategic plan. "Let's see how long she lasts without us," my father had said. I was about to show him exactly how long and how high I could rise on my own. By my 28th birthday, the trajectory of my life had transformed dramatically. What began as a junior analyst position had evolved into something far more significant after I identified a critical gap in the financial services market. Traditional banks ignored the needs of people living paycheck to paycheck, people like I had been after being abandoned. My proposal to develop an accessible financial platform for the underserved caught the attention of our CEO, eventually becoming the company's flagship product. "This isn't just business sense," my boss said during my performance review. "You understand these customers in a way our Ivy League team never could." If only he knew how personal it was. The app, which I named Thrive, provided affordable banking, credit-building tools, and financial education to people traditionally marginalized by the banking industry. Within 18 months of launch, we had 2 million users. By year 3, we had 10 million and acquired 3 smaller competitors. When our company went public, my equity stake transformed overnight from theoretical to substantial. The analyst who had once counted pennies for bus fare suddenly had a net worth of 8 figures. The irony wasn't lost on me. My understanding of struggling financially had become the foundation of my wealth. I purchased a penthouse in the financial district, though it remained sparsely furnished, a reaction to years of having nothing, perhaps, or simply because I spent most waking hours at the office. Success became my identity, achievement my only relationship. While I built my empire from understanding the forgotten, my father and Ethan's business began showing signs of stress. The music industry was transforming, and they hadn't adapted quickly enough. Social media mentioned canceled contracts, downsizing, artists leaving the label. Their golden trajectory was tarnishing. I might never have directly crossed their path again had it not been for a Canadian tech conference where I was invited to speak about financial inclusion. Vancouver, their territory. I almost declined, then realized the symmetry was too perfect to ignore. My keynote address received prominent coverage in business publications. I spoke about resilience, about building systems for those without safety nets, careful never to reveal the personal experiences that informed my expertise. The photographs accompanying the articles showed a confident woman in a tailored suit, successful, polished, unrecognizable from the desperate 18-year-old abandoned in a parking lot. 3 days after the conference, an email arrived in my professional account. Subject: Reconnection request from Ethan Mercer at Crescendo Talent.com. Ms. Ross, I saw your keynote at TechNorth yesterday. Your work with financial accessibility is impressive. I believe we may have crossed paths years ago, and I'd welcome the opportunity to reconnect over coffee during your stay in Vancouver. Best regards, Ethan Mercer, Chief Creative Officer, Crescendo Talent Management. The carefully worded message revealed nothing, acknowledged nothing. Just a professional reconnection request, as if we were former colleagues rather than siblings torn apart by betrayal. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do with every major decision. Research thoroughly. A deep dive into their current circumstances revealed what Ethan's polished email hadn't disclosed. Crescendo Talent was underwater. Their main recording studio had been mortgaged 3 times. Top artists had departed for larger labels. Trade publications hinted at cash flow problems and unpaid royalties. My father had suffered a minor heart attack the previous year, leaving medical bills their diminishing insurance couldn't fully cover. The golden child and his maker were falling, just as I was rising. After 3 days of deliberation, I replied, Mr. Mercer, thank you for your interest in my work. I'm curious about the nature of our previous connection, as I don't recall a professional interaction with Crescendo Talent. My schedule is quite full, but I could spare 30 minutes tomorrow at the Harborview Cafe at 2 p.m. if that would be convenient. Regards, Lily Ross, Chief Innovation Officer, Thrive Financial. The response was immediate, confirming the meeting. I selected the venue carefully, an upscale establishment where I'd be recognized, where the staff knew my preferences, where the power dynamic would be unmistakable from the moment he arrived. That night in my hotel room, I stood before the mirror, studying the woman I'd become. Successful, self-made, scarred but not broken. Would he recognize the sister he'd watched disappear in the rearview mirror? Would he see any trace of the girl they'd discarded? More importantly, would I maintain the composure I'd spent a decade perfecting when faced with the architect of my abandonment? Let's see how long she lasts without us, my father had taunted. The answer was, longer than their success without me. I would enter tomorrow's meeting not as a victim seeking reconciliation, but as a victor about to witness the beginning of their reckoning. Success is its own form of justice, and mine was just getting started. I arrived at the Harborview 30 minutes early, selecting a corner table with commanding views of both the entrance and the harbor. The maitre d' greeted me by name. I dined here twice during the conference, tipping generously. Your usual table, Ms. Ross. Would you like to start with the Pellegrino? I nodded, settling into the power position, back to the wall, facing the door. 15 minutes later, I watched Ethan enter, 6 years older than in his social media photos. He paused at the entrance, scanning the dining room before the host directed him to my table. He'd aged more than time alone would explain. The confident swagger displayed in his promotional materials had diminished to a cautious approach. His clothes were designer but slightly dated, his watch impressive but showing wear. Recognition flickered in his eyes as he approached, uncertainty mixed with disbelief. Lily, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Please sit down, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. It's been a long time, Ethan. He sank into the seat, staring as if confronted with a ghost. In many ways, he was. You look successful, he managed finally. That was the goal, I replied, taking a deliberate sip of water. You mentioned reconnecting. I'm curious why now, after all this time. He flinched at my directness. I saw your keynote, your photo in the business section. I couldn't believe it was you, we thought. That I was living on the streets? Addicted to something? I supplied calmly. Yes, I've read the interviews where you and Dad crafted that convenient narrative. Color drained from his face. It wasn't like that. What was it like, Ethan? Explain to me what happens in a family where an 18-year-old is abandoned in a mall parking lot while her father and brother laugh about how long she'll last without them. His eyes widened. You heard that. Mall security cameras have audio capabilities. The police investigation was quite thorough. The waiter approached, and I ordered a sparkling water. Ethan asked for whiskey neat. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the glass when it arrived. It was Dad's idea, he said after a substantial swallow. Mom was dying. We'd just gotten the terminal diagnosis. The medical bills were crushing us. Your college tuition was coming due. Dad snapped, said we needed to start over with a clean slate. And I was what? Excess baggage. He looked down. You were the expensive one. Between your tuition and Mom's treatments, Dad said we had to make a choice. So you chose. I was 20, Lily. I didn't know how to stand up to him. By the time I realized how wrong it was, months had passed. We'd established new identities in Canada. Coming back could have meant jail time for Dad. So, instead you created the story of your drug-addicted runaway sister? He flinched. People ask questions. It was easier than the truth. Easier for you, I corrected. Silence settled between us. I studied my brother. Once the golden child, now showing cracks in his carefully maintained facade. Why reach out now, Ethan? After 10 years of silence. He took another drink, longer this time. Things are complicated. The business isn't what it used to be. The industry changed. Dad's health isn't good. Heart problems, needs surgery we can't afford. I saw you at that conference talking about helping people build financial stability, and I thought. He trailed off, embarrassed by the transparency of his motives. You thought your abandoned sister might bail you out. I finished for him. We're still family, he said weakly. Family, I repeated, letting the word hang between us. Tell me, when was I family? When Dad decided my education was too expensive. When you laughed as you drove away. When you told journalists I was a drug addict. He had no answer. Does Dad know you're here? I asked. No. But he wants to see you. He's been following your success, saw the magazine cover last month. He says he always knew you'd make something of yourself. The audacity nearly made me laugh. How generous of him to acknowledge my success after hoping for my failure. He's changed, Lily. The heart attack scared him. He talks about regrets now. Convenient timing for regrets, wouldn't you say? Just as his business collapses and mine soars. Ethan looked desperate now. Will you at least meet with him? One conversation. That's all I'm asking. I considered the request, not out of familial obligation but strategic curiosity. Part of me, the abandoned 18-year-old who'd cried herself to sleep in shelters, wanted to refuse, to walk away as they had done. But the businesswoman I'd become recognized the value of closure, of completing the circle. Have him call me, I said, sliding a business card across the table. Not to discuss financial bailouts or family reconciliation, but so I can hear his explanation directly. One conversation. That's all I'm offering. Relief flooded his features. Thank you, Lily. I stood, placing cash on the table for both our drinks. Don't thank me yet. I'm not promising forgiveness or financial rescue. I'm only offering the courtesy of listening, something neither of you extended to me 10 years ago. As I walked away, Ethan called after me. For what it's worth, I've regretted it every day. I paused without turning. Regret without action is just guilt looking for absolution, Ethan. It's worth very little. Outside, my driver waited with the car door open. As we pulled away, I glimpsed Ethan still at the table, staring into his empty glass, the golden child tarnished by the consequences of choices made long ago. My phone chimed with an email notification, another acquisition opportunity for Thrive, another step in building the empire they never expected from the girl they left behind. 2 days after meeting Ethan, my father called. I was back in my office, reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant announced the call. James Mercer on line 1, she said. He says he's family? He's mistaken. I replied calmly, but I'll take it. I let the line ring twice before answering, centering myself for the conversation I'd both dreaded and anticipated for a decade. "This is Lily Ross." A pause, then a voice once so familiar, now aged and hesitant. "Lily, it's your father." "James," I acknowledged, deliberately using his first name. "Ethan mentioned you might call." "You're a hard woman to reach," he said, attempting a light tone that fell flat. "Your company's gatekeepers are quite protective. That's by design. What can I do for you?" Another pause. "I thought we could meet. There's a lot to discuss after all this time." "Is there?" "I believe everything was said the day you drove away from that mall." "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, his voice strained. "I want to explain." 10 years is a long time to formulate an explanation. "Please, Lily. One dinner. That's all I'm asking." I considered declining, then reconsidered. Closure required confrontation. "Fine. Tomorrow night. Lucille Restaurant. 8 o'clock. I'll make the reservation." That's quite an upscale choice. Financial concern colored his tone. "I can afford it," I replied coolly. "I assume Ethan will join us?" "Yes, we'll both be there. Thank you for this chance." "Don't mistake opportunity for forgiveness, James. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up before he could respond, turning to the view from my office window. Lucille was the most expensive restaurant in Vancouver, occupying the top floor of the city's tallest building. The setting was deliberate, a visible reminder of how far I'd come from the girl they'd abandoned. The following evening, I arrived at Lucille 30 minutes early, dressed in a designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The restaurant manager greeted me personally. "Ms. Ross, always a pleasure. Your usual table is ready." I dined there twice during the conference, establishing myself as a valued client. Power dynamics begin before words are exchanged. At exactly 8, they arrived. My father looked significantly older than his 58 years, his hair completely gray, his once commanding posture diminished by health concerns. Ethan followed, nervous energy evident in his movements. Both wore suits that had once been impressive but now showed subtle signs of wear. The maitre d' led them through the dining room, past tables of tech executives and celebrities. Eyes tracked their progress, noting the contrast between their dated attire and the setting. I didn't stand when they reached the table. "Lily," my father said, voice thick with emotion. You look remarkable." "Please sit," I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from me. They settled awkwardly as the sommelier approached with a bottle I'd pre-selected, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than they likely paid in monthly rent. The 2005 Chateau Margaux, as requested, Ms. Ross. My father's eyes widened at the label as the sommelier poured. I raised my glass in a mock toast. To unexpected reunions. They followed suit, taking cautious sips. Up close, the evidence of their financial distress was unmistakable. The frayed cuffs, the scuffed shoes, the haunted look of men about to lose everything they'd built. "This is quite a place," my father commented, glancing around. "You've done extraordinarily well for yourself." "Better than anyone expected," I agreed. "Especially for someone supposedly lost to addiction and homelessness." He flinched. "About those stories?" "Save it," I interrupted. "I'm not interested in excuses for character assassination. Let's discuss why you're really here." My father set down his glass, attempting to regain the authoritative demeanor he'd once wielded so effectively. "Ethan says he explained our situation. The business has faced challenges. The industry changed faster than we could adapt. Adaptation is fundamental to survival," I replied, something I learned firsthand. "We need help," he admitted bluntly. "The bank is foreclosing on the studio next month. Medical bills have depleted our reserves. We're facing bankruptcy. And you thought of me," I concluded. "How convenient that family connections matter now that you need something." The waiter arrived with appetizers, tiny portions of exquisite food on oversized plates. They ate hungrily while I merely sampled mine, observing their desperation. "The doctors say I need surgery," my father continued after finishing his plate. "Heart valve replacement. The Canadian system covers basics, but the specialist I need isn't covered. Without it. He left the implication hanging. How much are we talking about? I asked clinically. Hope flickered in his eyes. The surgery is around $200,000. The business needs about $2 million to clear debts and re-establish operations. And Ethan mentioned he's looking for employment. I turned to my brother. He nodded eagerly. I have industry experience, connections. I could help Thrive expand into entertainment financing. So to summarize, you need $2.2 million and an executive job, I said flatly. Anything else while we're reconnecting? My father reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. I know how this looks. I know we don't deserve your help. But despite everything, we're still family. Family. I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Was I family when you drove away? When you erased me from your lives? When you stole my college fund and used it to build your business in another country? I made a terrible mistake, he whispered. Your mother's diagnosis, the medical bills. I panicked. By the time I realized what I'd done, it seemed too late. It wasn't too late, I countered. For years, I waited for someone to come looking for me. No one did. We thought you'd be better off, Ethan interjected. Dad said the state would help you get scholarships, housing. The state. I laughed incredulously. I lived in shelters. I worked 3 jobs to afford a studio apartment with bars on the windows. I fought for every opportunity while you were handed everything. The main course arrived. Wagyu beef that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. They ate as if it might be their last good meal for some time. How did Mom die? I asked abruptly. My father paused, fork halfway to his mouth. Pancreatic cancer. It was quick at the end. She asked about you. Did she know what you'd done? He looked away. Not at first. We told her you'd chosen to stay behind for college, that you were angry about the move. By the time she realized the truth, she was too sick to do anything about it. The revelation struck deeper than I'd expected. My mother had died believing I'd abandoned them, not the reverse. I paid for her treatments with your college fund, he admitted quietly. It still wasn't enough to save her. So you sacrificed my future for a chance to save hers, I said. And when that failed, you created a new narrative where I was the villain. I was wrong, he said simply. More wrong than I've ever been about anything. If I could go back. But you can't, I interrupted, motioning for the check. None of us can. Panic flashed across my father's face. Does that mean you won't help us? I placed my corporate card on the leather folder without checking the total. I'd love to help, the same way you helped me when I was 18. His face drained of color. Ethan stammered. We didn't know how hard it would be for you. Yes, you did. I corrected him. That's why Dad said, let's see how long she lasts without us. You were betting on my failure. How disappointing for you that I succeeded instead. I stood, smoothing my suit. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's paid for. Lily, please. My father called desperately. I'm not asking for myself. If not the business, at least consider helping with the surgery. I don't want to leave Ethan alone. The way you left me? I asked quietly. For the first time, genuine shame crossed his features. Not the performance of regret he'd displayed throughout dinner, but real recognition of the damage he'd caused. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, his voice breaking. But I am sorry. Truly sorry. I studied him. The father who had once been the center of my world, now diminished to this desperate figure seeking help from the daughter he discarded. Goodbye, James, I said simply, turning to leave. Will we see you again? Ethan called after me. I paused, looking back at them one last time. That depends on whether you have anything to offer besides apologies and requests. As the elevator descended, I felt neither triumph nor closure. Only the hollow realization that some wounds change us so fundamentally that healing doesn't mean becoming whole again, but becoming something entirely new. I had become someone they never expected, someone stronger, more successful, and ultimately more compassionate than the family who had abandoned me. That knowledge would have to be enough. 5 years passed since our dinner at Lucille. I rarely thought about my father and Ethan anymore. Their absence had become a familiar scar, no longer painful but permanently etched into my identity. Phoenix Financial had expanded globally, with offices in 12 countries and over 30 million users. The lost girl from the parking lot had built an empire that eclipsed anything my father had ever achieved. My philanthropic foundation, Second Chances, provided scholarships and housing support for young adults aging out of foster care. Each year at the gala, I shared fragments of my story, never the full truth, but enough to fuel the mission without becoming a spectacle of trauma. The business alerts I'd set to monitor my father's company had long gone silent. Crescendo Talent Management had filed for bankruptcy 3 years earlier, their assets liquidated to cover mounting debts. I tracked the proceedings with clinical detachment, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy. On a crisp autumn morning, my assistant interrupted my morning review. "There's an Ethan Mercer in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insistent on seeing you." I put down my coffee, surprised. "How does he look?" She hesitated. "Tired. Worried. Nothing like his photos online." "Send him up," I decided, curious despite myself. When Ethan entered my office, the golden child was fully tarnished. His designer clothes had been replaced by department store basics, his confident swagger reduced to uncertain steps. Deep circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands fidgeted constantly with his phone case, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, taking the visitor's chair when I gestured to it. "What brings you here after all this time?" I asked, maintaining the professional distance I'd cultivated. He exhaled slowly. "Dad's health is failing. The doctors say it's his heart again. This time there's not much they can do except manage the decline." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that. He's been asking for you," Ethan continued. "Not for money or help, just to see you one last time." "Why?" "Closure, I think. For both of you." I studied my brother, the sibling who once had everything while I had nothing. Now roles had reversed in ways neither of us could have predicted. "How are you managing?" I asked, noticing the worn edges of his jacket. "I teach music at a community center. It barely pays the bills, but it's honest work." A flash of his old pride surfaced. "I'm good at it, helping kids who can't afford private lessons." The irony wasn't lost on me. The brother who'd benefited from my abandonment was now serving those who reminded him of me. And the family business? Gone, he admitted. Everything Dad built collapsed after the scandal. Scandal? Ethan looked surprised. "You didn't hear?" One of Dad's clients accused him of financial misconduct, diverting royalties, falsifying contracts. The investigation destroyed what was left of the company. So justice had found my father through other channels. The universe had its own way of balancing accounts. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Hospice care. Insurance covers the basics, but..." He trailed off. "You're not here for money," I stated rather than asked. "No." Just to deliver his message. "He said to tell you he was wrong. About everything. And that you proved it beyond any doubt." I walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. Somewhere in that landscape were the shelters that had once been my only refuge, the diners where I'd worked double shifts, the community college where I'd begun rebuilding my future. "We're still family," Ethan said softly behind me. "The last one's left." I turned, fixing him with a steady gaze. "No, we were family. But I've moved on. You should too." His face fell, but he nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll let him know you received the message." As he reached the door, something made me call after him. "Ethan." He turned, hope flickering briefly. "How long does he have?" "Weeks, maybe. Not much longer." I nodded once. "I'll think about it." 3 days later, I visited the hospice, a modest facility with caring staff but limited resources. My father's room was small but private, afternoon sunlight streaming through thin curtains. The man in the bed barely resembled the imposing figure who had once abandoned me. His body had withered, his formerly commanding presence reduced to fragile bones and translucent skin. His eyes opened when I entered, recognition dawning slowly. "Lily," he whispered, voice threadbare. "You came—" "Not for reconciliation," I clarified, taking the chair beside his bed. "For completion." He nodded weakly. "You succeeded. Beyond anything I imagined. Despite your expectations," I added. "Let's see how long she lasts without us." "Those were your words, weren't they?" He closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his features. "The worst mistake of my life. One of many," I observed without rancor. "I deserved everything that happened after," he admitted. "The business failing, the disgrace, all of it." I studied him, this stranger who shared my blood, but none of my journey. "I didn't come for your confession or to watch you suffer. I came to close this chapter." "Are you happy, Lily?" he asked unexpectedly. The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I had success, security, impact, all the things I'd fought for. But happiness? "I'm fulfilled," I answered honestly. "I built something meaningful from what you left me with, which was nothing." He nodded slightly. "Your mother would be proud." I stood, having said all that needed saying. "Goodbye, Dad." His eyes filled with tears. "Will I see you again?" "No," I said gently but firmly. "This is our ending." As I walked out of the hospice into the bright afternoon, I felt a weight lifting, not forgiveness exactly, but release. They had once abandoned me, leaving me alone to face the world. Now I was walking away on my terms, stronger for having survived them. My phone buzzed with notifications, business emergencies, foundation updates, life continuing its forward momentum. I stepped into my waiting car, leaving the past behind me where it belonged. This time, I was the one moving on while they remained behind.